This time on the Molden Cast.
So if you haven't noticed, October's been kind of quiet. I ended up taking a month off of the podcast, not because it was the end of the season, but because grief hit. And I was talking to my husband. I'm like, now what do? I took this month off and people are wondering, is the season over? Are you coming back? What's going on? And my husband and I were having this talk about the podcast. And a couple things came out in his discernment and love talking to me. One was just to be real, just to let you know that the reason that you haven't heard from me, the reason that I recessed and became very introverted was because of grief. October is a very difficult month for us, especially the beginning of October. October 4th is the day that we lost my husband's littlest sister, my best friend, and her husband, our best friends. And October 4th came this year, and it was the 6th year since they've been gone. And I just feel that grief should be linear. There should be growth, renewal, healing, and it should get easier. But this particular 4th was on a Wednesday, and they died on a Wednesday. Also, something about the temperature outside and the light, we all kind of marveled that it felt very much like that day. And so I don't know what it was, but for some reason, the weeks before it, the week after, and then definitely that day had a lot of grief. Because I said, maybe I'm just poured out. If you think of a glass of water that is just completely empty, I have nothing else to pour out. And my husband pointed out something super interesting. He said, people are coming and sitting on your couch and you're talking to them. You're going to speaking events and you're talking to them. You are still pouring out. He said, I think what social media and the podcast have that those situations don't have is many times the people that I'm talking to are nameless and faceless. I don't know the reaction when you hear this podcast. I often don't know what your face looks like while you're listening to it. And when I'm speaking to someone in person, whether that be a big group of people or just one-on-one, there's like an instant feedback of what people need to hear, of what is encouraging them, of ways that this is affecting them and can help them. And there's a lot of ways you can pivot and kind of move within that to encourage somebody, to strengthen somebody. And with the podcast and with social media, it takes a different type of faith, a different type of obedience to ask God to use me here to encourage others, but then not knowing sometimes if that's really working. And so it's a tough thing to measure. You can see, yes, if I go on analytics, which I promised not to do till the end of the season, but if I go on those, I could see how many people are tuning in, how many people are listening more than a minute, how many people listen all the way through the episode. But that really is very little feedback to me in the way that I like to connect with people. Ryan, thank you, Ryan, was encouraging me to get back on here in faith and to really share about what grief feels like now, what grief has felt like for this last 6 years, but also the ways in our family that we have found to really handle grief. I really believe in therapy. And after getting back from Florida, I just was so honored to speak at a retreat that had women who had kids in heaven. And I came back from that and I felt like grief was hitting me and I couldn't quite figure it out. So I called my counselor. I said, I feel grieved. I feel stressed and I can't quite figure out what it is. I just went to Florida and spent 10 days between DC and Florida. And I was at a grief retreat with mamas who had children in heaven. I said, could it be that? Could I be carrying some grief from being there and being among them and with them and hearing their stories? And he's like, no, I don't think that's it. I think you have grief in other things. As we talked, we kind of unearthed that I had grief around my dining table. And with all of the healing we've done, grief still continues to find me. Grief, I'm sure, still continues to find you. And he said, do you know what grief is, Jessye? Like, I thought I did. What is grief? And he said, grief is allowing the past to be in the past. And there's pain involved with that process. It doesn't mean that we move on in a way, but it means that we allow that not to weigh down our present. And there is a transferring of allowing the past to be in the past. And so what he pointed out is that my family is changing. When Kieran and KK came to live with us, when I had a newborn, when Katrina was 16 and Aiden was 10, the time that the book was written, we really made tight fences. I was needed in an extreme way, even bedtime being 2 hours long, and reading to them and holding them and crying with them, with driving them everywhere. And I knew that ahead, one day there's going to be an empty nest. But what I was surprised to find is that there's an empty dining table a lot of nights. Like, we are not all home most of the nights. Now, Katrina is 22. She is in graduate school. She's getting her credential as a teacher. And then Kieran now is in her first year of college. I have a rising senior and then a junior. And I'm just looking at these amazing young adults in my home and around me. And I can feel that time is short for them being under my roof. What I didn't see coming was, because everybody is, thriving and living their own lives and have all these opportunities in their own lives, that there's not very many nights where everyone is home to be around the dinner table. It's a blend of pain and a blend of joy, but it definitely has grief, because them needing me the way that they used to, the way that, I used to drive them around has changed. The way that everybody is home most evenings has changed. And there's grief in that. So what I have found is that grief can look so many different ways. And I often get people who have read the book or listened to this podcast and know our story, that we have lost people to suicide and homicide, that we have become a blended family. Some people even know the cruelty that happened even after that with certain family members and people in the community. And so there's like all of these layers that people feel like are so extreme. And they often come up to me and say, I've never experienced something like you. So, I can't even talk about my own suffering. But the truth is, yes, that happened, but suffering is suffering. Elizabeth Elliot says, suffering is having something you don't want or wanting something you don't have. And most of us are suffering in some way. We know we're going to suffer, but I find that there's different types of suffering, ones that people make a meal train for and sign up and bring you meals, casseroles to your house. They call you and say if you're okay, but there's many types of grief that we suffer quietly. There's many types of loss that we almost can't put into words, and that people don't know how we need a friend. And I just want to say, I see you. Like, if you are in that category, I see you. There's a lot of ambiguous grief. I was talking with a dear friend this week who has children who are estranged. And I thought, boy, no one writes you a card for that. Or it's very, very rare that someone says, I see your grief. Even though it can feel like death, there's very little love that comes in the form of a casserole in those situations. And so what I have found that helps with grief is to just have the courage to be authentic about it, to not worry so much if it sounds worthy of the pain you feel to another person, to the people around you, but to just say, this is how I feel. And this is what is happening inside of me. And it does really hurt. And I think when we could get really authentic with the pain, that's when we could start looking at healing more. Because I feel like I've done a lot of healing, but there are still layers and layers that come out. I've noticed that it seems like with every single loss, there are ripple effects. There are other losses. So if you've lost a teenager, there is the loss of them not being present in your life anymore. But there's also the loss of maybe the community that you were in being their parent. or being their sibling. Maybe you went to soccer games and you saw people there. And now because they're no longer on the earth, you don't have that soccer community. Or, there's many, many things that have like a secondary layer of grief with them, and that we're always kind of uncovering, looking at, trying to be authentic about, and trying to heal from. One of the things that I often talk about events where I go to speak with or at, it's kind of like, what do you want? We have to ask this question. We have to get real with what our grief looks like to us, what it feels like, what it actually is, not what we want it to be or what it should be or all these things. We just get to be ourselves. And if you are yourselves, what are the griefs? What are the losses? What's the suffering that you are feeling today? I feel like when I was little, it was so much simpler. My sister can't stand Band-Aids, so she's going to hate this example, but my best friend, she loved Band-Aids, and she often would say that her feelings were hurt, and her mom would give her a Band-Aid. I believe that her feelings were on her shoulder at that time. And I'm like, wouldn't that be nice if we could just tell people that we need a Band-Aid and put a Band-Aid on, where our feelings are, and it would feel better. But I find that there's so many types of Band-Aids that we put on things that aren't really healing, that don't really do what that Band-Aid did for us when we were little. And I find that we have to not only look with like a courageous authenticity at where we're at, but also really ask ourselves, what do we want? Jesus always asks what people want, which is shocking to me, because someone would have a crippled hand or not be able to walk, and he would ask them, what do you want? And I almost feel like I might have rolled my eyes. Like, this is so clear. Like, clearly I would like to use my hand. Clearly I would like to walk. But he always presents this question. And I know that he's the same Jesus now. And we need to ask him. We need to acknowledge what we want. There were many people, it says, that Jesus didn't heal. He never healed anybody from his own hometown, because none of them had the faith to be healed or wanted to be healed. And he's not a forceful God, but many times with our friends or with our neighbors or with our family, even more so, we feel like we know what they should want without asking. But if people won't partner with healing or don't want to be healed, they won't heal. I've talked to a lot of people about healing since Danny and Rena died, since this book has come out, since speaking tours have happened. And I find that some people really believe that there is just no healing. Maybe in heaven, but there's no healing here. And I feel like if someone said that to Jesus saying, what do you want? If he came into the room and you're like, well, in heaven, I want to be healed. He's like, okay. But I do believe that there is healing here. My grandma, when I was growing up, I remember in their house, they had one of those grandfather clocks. It was huge. It was beautiful. It was loud. It would chime every hour. And then there was kind of a magical, I can't remember if it was like noon or whatever, but it would play a whole song. But it had a huge golden pendulum. Can you picture this? Is anybody having grandparent vibes also? But there was a pendulum. And I long in my life have felt that if I avoid swinging into pain, that I can have more joy. I felt that joy and happiness and comfort are all kind of on one side of that pendulum. And on the other side were pain, the awkward things, being uncomfortable, failure. And I really felt like if I don't swing much into that side, perhaps I can keep my life happy. I can keep it joyful. But what I have come to find through our lives being shattered, through hearing so many, many stories of grief and loss and healing, is that when we armor ourselves up and we won't swing into pain, we cannot swing deeply into joy. Romans 5 talks about when we suffer, it can lead to endurance. Endurance leads to strength of character, and character leads to hope that will not disappoint us. So it's so interesting to me that suffering and hope are linked. It kind of blows my mind, because I really sometimes still feel if I don't lean into pain, if I avoid it, if I don't look at it, if I say it's not there, if I just say this is really no big deal and I continue on my life, no matter what it is, whether it be my dining table or the death of my best friends, or just the fact that this song, it feels crushing to me at the moment, whatever it is, if I choose to run from it and say it's not there, or I squish it down inside of me, then I end up numbing myself. I end up armoring myself. And then the pendulum cannot swing very far either direction. And so it's just this little ticking, barely moving pendulum. But what I have found is that the more that I lean into pain, into loneliness, into rejection, into the uncomfortable, into the awkward, that often I swing much deeper into pain. So the example lately was realizing that the kids' schedules were so full of good, beautiful things, of things that they should be doing, that they want to do, that they get to do, of so much opportunity. But then kind of looking at it, also thinking, wow, this means that there's going to be nights I eat dinner alone, or maybe even just with my 5-year-old. And that made me so sad. It made me so sad, and it made me feel so lonely. But what I believed God was doing is just open your hands. I felt like my little hands were so like tight fists saying like, no, 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 I don't want to let this go. I don't want to let this go. Maybe we can black out calendar days. Maybe I can make everybody come around this table on certain days, and I could plan it out, and everybody could feel that I was forcing it. And I remembered that God is not forceful. And I really felt like if I just surrender, if we move from being shattered to surrendering, and we open up our hands, it often pain rushes in. And there were a couple nights where I ate dinner by myself, a couple where I ate dinner with Mila, my 5-year-old. And I thought, either I can be so sad of who's not here and what's not happening, or I can look at this 5-year-old. And we ended up playing Go Fish and watching a documentary, as she says, about killer whales that was terrifying because it was eating penguins. And I'm like, no, we can't watch this. She's like, it's okay. It'll be okay. I enjoyed it so much with her, but I almost had to lean into the loneliness, lean into the grief of what was the past, and really just give all of myself to God with my hands open, telling God that like I want the best for my kids and I don't want to be demanding, leaving that all to Him. And so there were many nights and many days just practicing that, and it was painful. But what I have found since then is that when they did invite me to something, they invited me to a swing dance night. They were doing contra dance and line dances. And I thought there would be moms kind of there, and there really weren't. It was me and the mom whose house it was at. And the kids were like, please come dance with us. And it was awkward. And there were moments where I felt unsure or insecure. But I thought, I want to be open and available for these invitations for the things that I love the most. And we danced for hours, and it was so fun. And I think part of what made it so special and so fun was that I was able to feel chosen. And if I had pushed saying like, are you going to spend time with me? Are we going to see each other? Are we going to? And it was just the lesson I was learning the last couple of weeks. But I think because I was so open, and because I wasn't demanding, and because I wasn't taking things into my own hands the way that I naturally do, that when they invited me and wanted me around, I really felt wanted. I felt loved and treasured. My son invited me to coffee. My other daughter, we went paddleboarding. We all went to the lake, but it was all because by invitation, nothing by force. And I realized if I had not leaned into that loneliness or pain or uncomfortable moments, I would not have had my hands as open to feel as much love and joy as I did. And I think this could be scaled up or scaled down. I believe that the deepest pains in our lives with loss and hurt, have really produced an understanding in me of how deeply loved and accepted I am, even when I'm broken, even when I have nothing to bring. I think one of the most painfully unhinging things was people's kindness to me over the years, of the things that I can never pay back, of the ways that people poured themselves out for me and I had nothing to give. I didn't even have the bandwidth to write a thank you card. But in that pain and almost that gap of brokenness, I experienced love and care like I never have in all of my life. And it has deepened all of my relationships. And so, even knowing that, even speaking about that with groups, I still find it so difficult to lean into that pain, to open up my hands and surrender, and to let it remake me, to let grief remake me, even the ones that people don't bring me meals for or send flowers for, right? And I have a feeling that many people listening now, I know that you have griefs and sufferings that people know very little about. And it's really easy to say, oh, it's no big deal. But I know God sees you. And it's okay to call it suffering. It's okay to open yourself up to feeling that. I think I get afraid that I will feel too much and then what will happen. But I have found that our bodies only have so much capacity for grief, for pain, but also for joy. I know that on Katrina's episode, she talked about that her no bad day theory. She believes that we cannot have 100% bad day, that it will always have a small amount of goodness, and to look for that goodness, to train yourself to not ignore those goodnesses, to have your eyes open, have your ears and your heart open. And the only way we can do that is by experiencing the pain with an open heart, which hurts a lot more, which makes it so that I'm often look weaker than I would like to look. But that is just being authentic. And there are many, many things that hurt me, and I'm walking through. And I just wanted anybody hearing this to know they're not alone. I think often we compare grief. We think that I've never had a homicide in my family, so how can I even talk to you about this? But the truth is suffering, and we cannot compare suffering. There'd be too many pieces to it. There'd be so many things that we just cannot know. I don't know the support you have, the chemistry in your makeup, the way that you process things, your belief system, your relationship with God, your relationship with your family, your relationship with others, what you've been through, the experiences in your life that you can pull on to know that this will be okay or not. I mean, like, there's so many pieces to suffering that we cannot compare. And so let's just not. How about we just be empathetic, saying, wow, that hurts you, then that hurts me. That I believe that this is hard and I will be with you. Even if it's just something that's unfamiliar, I can be beside you. And it doesn't have to be at a high standard where the whole world understands this grief. You say it's grief. That's enough for me as your friend. I think after we have the courage to be authentic with our loss and our grief, I have found that I need to have the courage to hold what's mine and let go of what isn't. I get really confused with what things God wants me to hold and what are the things that I really need to open my hands in. Our family lost Rena and Danny, and I often forget that God took care of everything after she died. Her kids were cared for, like her house was cared for, everything was cared for. And but I often somehow start believing that if I don't hold everything, that everything will fall. So even with that data in my face, understanding that God takes care of things, even when they fall, I still have a lot of trouble remembering what's mine and what's not. But I would really encourage you to think about this, because we're not the whole. When we feel like we're the whole, when we hold everything, or we hold things that aren't ours, and we forget that God is the one who holds things, He's the whole, then anxiety ensues. We are exhausted and haggard. We can never have rest because we have to hold everything all the time. And it's almost like we also can't enjoy life and experience it. I was talking to a group this weekend, and I was talking about what was life like for you at Christmas while you were a child. And many people brought up words like excitement, anticipation, joy, family, connection, waking up early. I mean, there were all of these words that were very positive. And then I said, what is Christmas like for you now as a mom, as an adult? And the words were very different. It doesn't mean there wasn't happiness there, but it was like financial strain, exhaustion, pressure, expectation. And I'm like, how did we get here? How did I get here as a mom where I have forgotten that I can experience it and enjoy life? And I think a lot of that I rob from myself by thinking that I am the whole, thinking that I hold so many things that really God holds, that really others hold, that even my kids themselves hold, or my husband himself holds, or my friends hold, or our church holds, that I don't need to hold. And so I think getting really crystal clear with prayer, with maybe even getting really sound advice from friends of like, what is mine to hold? And I'm so surprised at how small that list is in comparison to what I feel it is. I think the other side of that is that sometimes we feel what we do doesn't matter. And this is folly. What we do matters. It matters. It may not matter to the people around us in that moment. It may not matter or be seen by, the public, but it matters to God. It says that every single thing we do, we will give an account for. He is keeping track of every good thing that we do, and he will reward us for them. So what we do matters, and we can only love him as much as we obey him. And so it matters a lot. But I think when we feel like nothing we do matters, and often when I have a situation where I am talking to myself on a microphone, like it feels right here, I have to remember that it matters to God, that my part matters, that this hour I'm spending here matters. And there's such a relief in that. There's rest in knowing we don't hold it all. There's purpose in knowing what we do matters. And we get to have influence instead of control that way. And it's such a relief. It's such a relief as a mom, as a wife, as the ministries that I do, the words that I write, the words that I speak, the thoughts that I have, the ways that I love my kids and my family and my neighbors. It all matters, but I don't hold it all. I don't hold it all. And I would say the third thing is the courage to hope and heal. Now, it feels like you wouldn't need courage to hope or to heal, but I believe they both take a tremendous amount of courage. Because in order to let love lead, we have to let go of self-protecting, of armoring up, of numbing. And we have to believe that love and pain can coexist, that actually that is the way they exist. We see through Jesus's life and his death, that is how love was lived out. It was lived out by him laying his life down. There have been so many days I have stood on my front porch, and we live by this butte. It's called Black Butte. And you could kind of see the east where the sun comes up, kind of comes over one side of that butte. And with the dark October mornings, sometimes you can be out there. You could think the light's never coming. It's so dark. And I have felt that way in my life. But then the sky just starts lighting up. The horizon is clearly brighter in the east than it is in the west. And slowly the trees are silhouetted, and you can see the outline of the butte. And you know that that light is coming. And then the third phase is the sun actually rising. It starts spilling over that horizon. And I often have to think, what phase am I in? How would you answer this? I would love to get feedback from this. On Spotify, you can comment. You could go to my social media on Instagram, Jessye_Wilden. I have it in the show notes. But I would love to hear, what phase are you in? Are you in darkness, where it is taking a lot to just believe that there will ever be light again in your life, in what has happened and where you are and what it feels like? Or maybe the sky is just starting to light up. It still takes hope to know that there will be light, there will be goodness again, but you could see the evidence of it. Or maybe the sun is shining, it is coming up, it is warming you, and you are in a season of sunrise. I'd love to hear. When Kieran lost her parents, I remember that she wanted to go climb that cherry tree. And it's at the end of my book, in the epilogue, but we went to go climb the cherry tree that had been outside of the condo that Danny Arena and her and KK lived. And she just wanted to climb it one last time. We went there, and to our devastation, it had been chopped down, cut down, maybe an hour before. There was sawdust everywhere. And that was grief to her. That was where all the grief came pouring in, because that's how it feels. Grief is when there was something there, beautiful, thriving, and now it has been chopped down, a whole life chopped down and changed, a shift, maybe a move, maybe a dream lost, and it is chopped down and it is just no more. Where something was beautiful and thriving, it is now nothing. It is sawdust. I decided to give a talk. It was my first talk as the book was about to come out. And as I finished my talk, I came down the stage and a neighbor of Danny and Rena and Kieran and KK came up and said, I remember the day they cut down those cherry trees. It had been 4 or 5 years since. And she said, but they grew back. I'm like, what? They grew back. And they did. And now they had cherries. And so before they never had cherries and now they had cherries. And I thought, that is how grief feels. What people don't know since the book is that I went to go take pictures so I could add those pictures of those beautiful cherry trees to the back of the book. And they had been chopped down again. And they are growing back again. And I thought sometimes that is just what grief feels like. You feel like you're just getting back up, that there are cherries now growing in your life, and boom, pruning happens, or maybe the whole part of your life gets cut down again. And I think that believing for that sunrise, believing it will not always be this dark, believing that things can grow back and be better and more fruitful than even they were before, is incredibly vulnerable. It takes so much risk to believe that there is hope, that there is goodness coming, and then to open your hands up for that goodness. We think of joy as so easy, but it's not. Have you ever had a really, really good season in your life and you're like, something's going to happen, the other shoe's going to drop, I just know it, and it's almost like you can't enjoy it because joy feels so risky. There is so much more to lose when we are joyful. So often we find that we're more comfortable in our agony and our pain. And we're like, I will just stay here. I will root here because I know this. This is familiar to me. And to have joy again after loss, any kind of loss, or to find that suffering continues in our lives, it feels more and more like hope and joy have huge risk because now we know the cost of it. We know the cost of it. We know that it takes incredibly brave people to decide to heal, to find joy. My daughter Katrina believes in the no bad day theory, but I'm thinking to take it a step further that there's not actually the perfect day either. There's not 100% good day either. Have you ever planned, like you moms and dads are going to really be with me on this one. Have you ever planned a vacation? You're like, this is going to be amazing. We bought the 3 days at the Disney resort, or we planned this whole vacation at the ocean. We have looked into everything. We have paid all the deposits and we are going. We have it scheduled on the calendar. We all need this. And you go and it's terrible. Whether the rain ruins the day, the kid crying, another kid's feeling very selfish. Maybe you're just too intense. I have been too intense that there's such a pressure to enjoy it that it almost takes away from the joy of it. Talk about irony. But then there's these wisps, these moments inside an ordinary day that you could never plan. One day in the kitchen, Ryan had a song that he was talking about that he could rap to, one that he listened to in high school. And we're like, we want to hear this. So we turned up the music, and in the kitchen, he totally rapped the whole thing for us. And we're like, nice, nice. Then Aiden has a song that she can rap to. So she played it. So we start having this rap battle in the kitchen. We are laughing and everybody's trying to like out rap each other. And it was amazing. I could never have planned that moment. There are so many moments like that. And so let's not just hold on for the weekend. There's so many days where I'm like, if I just get to the weekend, if I just get to when this part of my career is successful, or I think, oh, when they're this age, or whatever happiness is over that hill, when I get 2 weeks vacation, whenever happiness is just over the hill, I find that we get there and happiness is still over another hill. And it's so unsatisfying. But instead, maybe joy and pain live closely in each day. That there are moments where you have a flat tire and it is a terrible morning. But then there are other moments where you get that call from your kid at college and everything's good for those few minutes, or that 20-second hug right before someone leaves. Or one of my favorite moments is picking up my kindergartner from school and she spots me. And that run to me with that joy and those outstretched arms, that's a wisp of joy that I cannot plan, that I have no control over, but I can accept with open hands. So maybe there's not 100% good days, and maybe there's not 100% bad days, but what if instead we learn to find that goodness? We learn to look for it. I have 2 vases in my kitchen, huge vases, and they are sitting beautifully on my table. And I used to believe that I would wait just till my husband brought me flowers, or maybe it was a special occasion and I would put flowers in them. But I have instead found that I always want those vases to be full. So maybe it's branches, maybe it's some pussy willows, maybe it's some sticks, or maybe it's buying flowers at the checkout stand myself. But I have found that I want those vases full. And I find that to be true in my own life. Like I can wait for thankfulness just to rush in, or maybe Thanksgiving when we go around the table and we say we're thankful for something. But instead, I want to be a hunter of good things in my life. I want to have my eyes wide open to see those moments, to absorb them, to be fully present for those 20 seconds or that 10 minutes, or maybe that 2 hours on a paddle boat with my daughter in all of that beauty. How can I do that more? How can I train myself more? And I think it's just thinking of our lives as those vases where every day we just find even 3 good things before our head hits that pillow at night. Just making an agreement with ourselves that we will look for 3 good things, even in the midst of hard things. One of the things I've been most surprised at is when I tell the story of the day Danny and Rena died. There was so much goodness in that day as well. There were people who loved us, who cared for us. There were moments of even laughter and humor and joy. There were moments of deep love, of God's goodness. And I think about Psalm 23 that says, "And your rod and your staff, they comfort me." That's in the valley of darkness. It's not after, once you can look at this with better perspective. It's like you are with us with your rod and your staff. You're comforting us in it. You're with us in it. You help us know what is ours and what is yours as our shepherd. So don't miss the goodness, friends, and have the courage to live in joy. Open yourself up more to pain. Open yourself up to feeling it, to experiencing it, to speaking about it, to being authentic about it, to allowing yourself to be a broken person, and let God's love rush in. Let your friends love you the way that they most want to, by you being authentic with what really hurts in your life. And what are the things that you need to let go of today? What are the things that you can look at that say, those aren't mine? They're just not mine. And what are the things that are yours that you can nurture, that you can be a salve for in your life, that you can hold close and say, these are mine and I'm going to do them really well? And how can you lasso those moments this week, friends? And that is how we have been surviving October. That is what's been working in my heart. Choosing to be silly, to do pranks on each other that are permission to be happy when we're happy, to be sad when we're sad, and to choose to not get stuck in the middle. Keep leading with love, friends.
If you like the show, would you please give it a review?